I mean, I don't mind. I'll take a fine. I don't really care. I thought, Ben Taylor was fucking terrible tonight. You come out tonight, you're competing pretty hard. Third quarter, I get a bullshit tech, changes the whole dynamic of the game, changes the whole flow of the game. You can look up most of my texts this year have been with Ben Taylor officiating. So at a certain point as a player, you feel it's personal.
After Wednesday's game between the Raptors and the Clippers, it might be understandable why Fred VanVleet thinks NBA referee Ben Taylor has it out for him. VanVleet was almost right when he said half his texts have come from Taylor. This one stirred up some controversy as VanVleet lightly passes the ball off the stanchion, but before the season, the NBA made it clear to all players that this sort of thing would not be tolerated.
Players are not allowed to intentionally or forcefully throw or kick the ball against the basket support for any reason. Any violation of this rule will result in a technical foul.
The next tech he got from Taylor wasn't captured by the cameras, but we can assume he argued that the ball went off of Jackson Hayes. But this was a 50-50 call, and with slow motion, we still can't definitely determine what the result was. And that brings us to the Clippers game, where VanVleet felt compelled to speak out. The thing you have to understand is that he's a very difficult player to referee. He's extremely aggressive and provocative with his hands, trying to knock the ball out and push the boundaries of what is legal on defense, which serves to make him a very effective defender despite his comparatively small stature.
Most of the refs are trying hard. I like a lot of the refs are trying hard. They're pretty fair. They communicate well.
It was good to hear VanVleet say that, and he is the rare player that will lift his hand and acknowledge when he has committed a foul and the ref has caught him.
And then you got the other ones who just want to be dicks and just kind of fucks the game up. Nobody's coming to see that shit.
The problem with VanVleet's characterization is that there is plenty of evidence of Ben Taylor being receptive to players and coaches and willing and open to talk to them about their concerns. In order to understand why VanVleet is being so inflammatory, we have to go back to early January when the Raptors played the Trailblazers in Toronto. With this play, it should seem obvious why they call the flagrant one on Siakam. After all, he grabs Dame's foot and causes him to fall to the floor. While the Raptors wanted something on Dame for grabbing Siakam's arm here, that looks a lot more like two players scrumming for the ball, and it's reasonable to ignore it. On the next play, chaos ensues as Barnes blocks the Josh Hart shot cleanly but gets whistled for the foul.
This is just frustrated that he has to use. That's a clean one.
It's possible you gleaned from those Jack Armstrong sounds that the Raptors' challenge of the call was successful. And you'd be right, Barnes didn't foul him, but Fred VanVleet did. So upon review, it was Ben Taylor, in his duty as crew chief, despite not being the ref who called it, who has to break the bad news to the home crowd.
During the review process, we see that Fred VanVleet makes first illegal contact. So the foul has changed to Fred VanVleet, and we will still shoot 2 free throws.
But based on their reactions, the Raptors had a hard time accepting this. And it all culminates in the next play, when Jeremy Grant very provocatively goes for a steal and knocks the ball loose. While Barnes gets the call on the free throws, VanVleet begins complaining about Grant's play, which actually looks pretty clean. Considering the Raptors benefited from the whistle on this play, I totally understand why Natalie Sago had had enough of his griping and gave him a technical foul. This game had a lot of stoppages for the refs to convene and discuss complicated calls to make sure they got them right. But to impatient players, coaches, and fans, it might have appeared as if the refs didn't know what they were doing. But there's nothing more important than getting the call right, and as crew chief, Taylor is very deliberate and thorough. And I suspect this was the game that put Taylor firmly in VanVleet's crosshairs. And here's another thing you have to understand about Fred VanVleet. He plays harder than almost any other player in the NBA, and he's got one of the highest basketball IQs around. There's a reason why he's consistently on my favorite players list, which is why I'm always picking him to exceed his averages when I fire up the Underdog app and play Pick'em, where you can choose 2 to 5 players, then decide on the over-under for specific stats. It's super easy to set up, and you can win up to 20 times your initial entry fee. If you think VanVleet is going to hit a bunch of threes against the Nuggets on Tuesday, then get him the action. But it doesn't stop there. You can make it a rival and add players from different teams to make it even more interesting. They've also got drafts where you can compete against me. You think you got what it takes? If you click on the link below and use my promo code BBALL, you'll get a deposit match of up to $100. So if you want a chance to get up to 20 times your money or beat me in a draft, you've got to check out Underdog Fantasy. Use my code BBALL, get up to $100 in matching deposits, and you'll have a better chance at winning money and understanding what happened to the Raptors in recent games that compelled VanVleet to make the most expensive speech of his career.
On most nights, a couple of out of the three, there's one or two that just fuck the game up, and it's been like that a couple games in a row. Denver was tough, obviously.
Denver was tough because the game came down to a controversial technical called by none other than Scott Foster, who took exception to Scotty Barnes questioning his integrity. A huge no-no that of course is going to earn him a tech plus an ejection. They caught Poeltl in no man's land, and the foul was obvious on the inside shoulder of Aaron Gordon. Plus, Foster is probably more sensitive to this, considering the Donaghy scandal, but even more importantly, Barnes cannot be talking like this in such a crucial part of the game. Should it have been just a technical foul and not an ejection? Maybe. But the Raptors make a huge mistake by having Poeltl, a terrible free throw shooter, come up to set a ball screen, which enables the Nuggets to foul them off the ball and put him on the free throw line. Nurse wants to argue that it should be an away from the ball foul and the Raptors should have retained possession after the free throws, but as long as the player is part of the play, he can be fouled. In this game, VanVleet agreed with two of his calls so much that he raised his hand to acknowledge it, but there were complaints on a number of calls that were obvious fouls, and this one was a doozy. After Bruce Brown cuts VanVleet off legally and then knocks the ball away, you can see VanVleet yelling at the referee in the middle of the play. And we'd seen him do this against Memphis while guarding the ball, and the referee had no choice after it went on for so long and gave him the tech. What you have to remember is that these things add up over the course of a game. If a team continues to argue against good calls, the refs are going to get fed up eventually. The rules even address this specifically. Let's look at the calls that were made against the Raptors versus the Clippers where they openly complained to the refs. Achua might have had his hands up in the air, but he illegally contacts the ball handler with his hips for an easy call for Ben Taylor, with VanVleet putting his hands up while Boucher and Achua openly question the call. Right in front of Ben Taylor, VanVleet is up to his aggressive ways with his hedge. While the swipe might be clean, he makes contact with his hand to Leonard's chest that causes Kawhi to fall backwards. Taylor, in a decidedly undickish move, patiently explains the obvious call. In the third, a few plays happened consecutively that served to get the whole Raptors team focused on the reffing and not the game. This Siakam drive saw some contact, first by Morris, but you can see Siakam has his off arm up into Morris's body too, and then Paul George tries to use verticality, and this could go either way. Plus, Siakam again uses his off arm to contact PG's arms, so the ref made a decision to play on. And Nurse complains to Taylor even though he wasn't part of this play. It wasn't like the Raptors didn't benefit from no calls themselves. When Zubac crams the ball through the hoop, he gets contact to his right shoulder and to his face with no whistle. Barnes goes strong to the hoop and the refs deemed he initiated the contact, so let them play through it. And that brings us to the technical foul on VanVleet. There is a little collision on the cut and then a push with both hands in the back. The refs had little choice but to make this call. The entire team reacts, but when VanVleet mockingly claps too many times, Taylor had had enough. VanVleet should have known clapping can get him a tech. He got his second one and an ejection against the Pelicans in November. For much of the game, the refs have been enduring complaints from the Raptors, and we already showed you the rules allow the refs to call technical fouls based on continuous criticism, and it makes it worse when obvious calls are questioned. It wasn't like VanVleet wasn't benefiting from a lack of calls himself. He reaches in on the Kawhi drive and makes contact to his chest without a call. He is allowed to have a hand on Gordon's back with a slight push before reaching in and pressuring the turnover. And after his tech, he gets in the air to contest this Paul George layup with a lot of hip-to-hip contact, and the refs let what could have been an easy foul go. Towards the end of the game, I spied VanVleet with a couple of problematic plays that won't engender goodwill from the referees. While there is a little contact after the release to his offhand, watch how he makes it seem like a sniper's in the building. And with the game out of reach, he pulls up in front of Eric Gordon and tries to make it seem like he got fouled despite no contact at all. There was simply no way to claim the refs were penalizing the Raptors more than the Clippers. Here's another dunk with an obvious foul call on an all-star no less that the refs opted to pass on, and Taylor himself is there to give Scotty Barnes the call on this point-blank shot. To be clear, referees do miss calls, and other times decide not enough of an advantage was gained to blow the whistle. But that is a far cry from the allegations that Fred VanVleet made in his post-game remarks. And there's no doubt in my mind that the incessant complaining to the refs make VanVleet's life more difficult.
Just kind of fucks the game up. Nobody's coming to see that shit. They come to see the players. And I think we're losing a little bit of the fabric of what the NBA is and was, and it's been disappointing this season.
Honestly, I think VanVleet is talking more out of frustration for his team's losing record this season and losing 4 of the last 6 games than believing the refs have some sort of agenda where they want to be the center of attention. That is simply nonsense.
It's never a good place to be. That's not why we lost tonight. We got outplayed. But it definitely makes it tougher to overcome.
At least he realized why they lost this game. And as a leader to his teammates, he needs to change the focus and start worrying about the things they can control. I guarantee it will lead to more success.